Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see you here. Shafan is here. Good morning. Yes, I got you. For attendance, I look at both Teams and YouTube. So as long as people are showing up somewhere, then I've got you. Cindy's here. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, KC again. Good morning, Karen again. Who's here? Ying. Good morning, Ying. Good morning, Jenna and Mashid. Good morning to you. Hey, Adelbert. How you doing this morning? Luan is here. That's good. Good morning, Luan. Good morning, Carmen. It's fun. I said hi to you already, but I'll say hi again. Ella's here. Hi, Ella. And Min is here. Hello, Min. Um, okay, so um, if you're in Vancouver today, you'll see it's a nice, beautiful, sunny day. So that's nice. Tomorrow's going to be nice too. So that's cool. I will remind you before we get going that, of course, your micropapers are going to be due on Friday. So the one about looking at a world religion and identifying three characteristics of religion and explaining how we see those characteristics showing up in that particular religion of your choice. Like I mentioned, don't choose your own religion if you're a religious person because A, that's too easy and I want you to do some research, and B, it's hard to look at your own religion in a very objective way, right? Because your belief is tied up in that. So don't choose your own. Choose one that's not yours, and make sure that that's ready to go for Friday. Okay. Eliana's here. Good morning, Eliana. Okay. So maybe without further delay, let's hop in. Good morning, Pearly. Let's hop into it and talk about what we're going to talk about. Whoops. Hang on. Oh, I forgot to do something, people. Hang on one second. That's bad. 1 second. I gotta do a thing. Okay. I'll be I'll be right back. Give me. Go back to here and there. That's what I wanted. Good morning, Sam. Good morning, Pika. Okay. Now we're ready to go. So yesterday, as you no doubt recall, we started talking about India, and we said that we were going to look at all these different aspects of India in terms of culture and environment and politics and interactions and conflicts and values and beliefs. But I also said that India is a part of the world, a region of the world that has existed for thousands of years. It's very culturally diverse, it's very linguistically diverse, it's very religiously diverse, and of course, it has a very long history as well. So, what we'll talk about here is just the very tip of the iceberg of what India is culturally. So, we're not going to do a good job covering the country, but we'll do our best to learn what we can in the time that we have. Okay. We said that this was the basic area of ancient or historical India. If you looked at a modern map of India today, you would see that the modern state of India is here, but also part of this would be probably Pakistan, maybe Afghanistan, Nepal, and Tibet, um, and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. All of these would be kind of modern states that exist in the place of what we're looking at as ancient India. And what we said yesterday was that similar to Mesopotamia and similar to Egypt, the Indus River Valley had its own civilization appear roughly at the same time as the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations arose. Um, yeah, so um, kind of around 5,000 years ago or so, we see lots of little towns and cities cropping up in this area of the world. And so people start to settle down close to the river, they start to farm, and they seem to be ruled by some sort of centralized political authority. Yeah, so we see around 7,000 years ago, people are starting to farm in this area, and then again around about 3,000, well, about 5,000 years ago, people start to create a civilization. They start to create cities. They start to trade with places as far as away as Mesopotamia, which is quite amazing for this period of history. But again, we don't have a lot of answers about this society because we've never been able to figure out how to read what they've written. Um, so again, we see lots of urban construction. We see the construction of cities. We see lots of pottery left over, inscriptions that unfortunately we can't read. And again, it suggests that there's some sort of centralized political control here, but we just don't know much about what that was like. So I'm just going to jump ahead. We've seen these slides from yesterday, so I'm not going to I'm not going to go through all of them. But here we could see a kind of an aerial view, a city plan of what Harappa looked like, and you can see a rather large city with really straight corridors and streets, lots of construction. You can see here an aerial photograph. The same thing with Mohenjo-daro, a very complicated city that's laid out kind of north-south according to straight lines. And so very impressive construction for the time, right? And I showed you a few pictures yesterday of maybe what the city would have looked like thousands of years ago. And I also pointed out the fact that these cities had sanitation. They had a sewage system. And so you can see the guy in the bottom right there is kind of in the bathroom taking care of some business. And he's able to do that because there were sewers. And so there were sewer lines running down the street. These would have been covered over with stones or wooden planks, but you could actually get rid of your waste. And again, this kind of sanitation doesn't show up in ancient cities for thousands of years afterwards. So very, very significant. Again, these people were farmers, but they also raised animals. And so we have the remains of cows and chickens and sheep and goats and dogs and cats, but also elephants and water buffalo seem to have been used as well. And again, we said that, and again, I'm going through this quickly, I know, but we've talked about it already. Again, we don't really know much about the religion of this period because, again, we haven't been able to read their writing. And so we see a lot of these seals here. So this might have been a way in which people signed their name in the past if they needed to enter into a legal agreement, or if they produced a product, like if they were a craftsman of some sort, they might use this to stamp it into clay to say that this is my signature, this is mine. And so we see one here with maybe some writing on top and a bull and a flower here. Here we see another bull with some writing up top. Again, we can't really read it, unfortunately. Here we see a very interesting kind of looks like some kind of guy sitting in kind of a yoga pose. He seems to have some horns on his head. We're not sure if those are if that's a hat or if he's a god, or you can see kind of a tiger here on the right and a bull on the left. And so again, these are kind of very interesting expressions of this culture, but we don't really know what they mean, unfortunately. And again, I showed you this yesterday too. There's this sculpture that people refer to as a priest king. Again, he looks very regal, he looks very distinguished, but again, we just don't know if he was a real person or if he was a god or if he was a king, or it's just tough to know what these things are, right? And eventually we said that the Indus civilization was going to disappear, right? It was what tends to happen with these civilizations is that they kind of appear and disappear. And so for various reasons, people start to live in one place. They start to live in large cities. They start to farm intensively. There's some sort of political or religious authority that is sort of controlling this civilization. But then sometimes, because of invaders or because of climate changes or things like that, people tend to leave the cities and sort of disappear out into the countryside again. And so lots of early civilizations go through these periods where lots of people are living in one place and there's kind of centralized control. And then they go through periods where everyone kind of disappears off into the hills and does their own thing. Centralized control kind of collapses. And then often we have a period where we don't really know what's going on because people aren't writing things down as much as they used to. And so, Greece goes through a period like this. Egypt has those intermediate periods where things kind of become decentralized. And the same thing happens here in the Indus Valley. We have a period where there's lots of, good morning, Caleb. We have lots of centralized control and things happening. And then we have a period where people just kind of disappear back into the hills and it's less clear what's going on. Although for the Indus River civilization, there is the arrival of these Indo-Aryan people who you read about yesterday. And they seem to appear here. They seem to come from kind of the northwest. They come through the mountain passages and they arrive in this area and maybe disrupt the civilization of the the Indus River people. Although we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, okay. So I asked you a few questions yesterday. So I asked you to read a section of the textbook from page 73 to 75, and then I asked you some questions. And so the first question I asked you was this: Who are these Indo-Aryans and where do they come from? Again, I think I might have answered this already, but that's okay. We'll do it anyway, okay? So Cindy says here, they are migrants traveling to the subcontinent via mountain passes located in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Yeah, so they come in from the north and west. It seems that they are, well, I won't say anymore. What else do you have? Give me some more if you have some more. Who are these people? Who are these people? Tika says, they're composers of Vedas, right? So we refer to them also as Vedic people. So Indo-Aryans or Aryans or Vedic people is how we kind of refer to this group. And they start appearing around 1700 BC. So around 3,700 years ago, they start to filter their way into the Indian subcontinent. And they compose these Vedas, and those were important as well. Let me just see, did I ask you a question about that? Maybe I won't jump ahead there. Sometimes I do. So we have around 1700, around the time that the Indus River civilization starts to decentralize or decline. We have the arrival of these new people from another land, another place. And so what do we learn about this Indo-Aryan culture and from the hymns that they sing? So they have a lot of these Vedas are kind of religious hymns. They're kind of religious prayers to the gods. And it seems that those prayers and hymns have been around for probably thousands of years. They only get written down around 500 BCE. And so people have been passing these down orally, right? They've been memorizing them for centuries, for generations. Finally, they get written down in about 500 BC, and that's when we're actually able to read them and see what they say. And so again, based on these prayers, based on what people say in their prayers and their hymns, we can learn a few things about what their life was like, right? And so Cindy here says, so the hymns are preserved by a few priestly clans who utilize them for a religious function to please higher powers. Yes, so these Vedas would have been things that priests memorized, they passed down from one to the other. And yeah, they would have used them to pray to their gods, right? And ask them for help, right? KC says their way of life and how they came to India. So they beseech the gods to bless them with cattle and friends and wealth and sons, right? So even just from that little section, we can see that they value cattle, right? If what does a blessing mean? Well, here in the West, right, in modern civilization in 2020, most people don't pray for cows, right? Cows are not what you want. You might want money or success, but you don't want cows necessarily. That's not how we measure blessing here in the West. But for the Aryans, cattle were important, and so it seems like they were herding cattle when they first arrived in this area of the world. So they were pastoralists. That was how they were making their living. They were herding cows, and so they were praying to the gods to bless them with cattle, right? With friends, yeah, friends are always good, right? Even thousands of years ago, it was good to have friends. With wealth and with sons. That's interesting too, right? So we see that the Indo-Aryans or Vedic people seem to have, they seem to value sons, right? They seem to value boy children for some reason. Maybe we'll get to that later. Thika says here, we know Indian culture from hymns as a specific religious function to please higher authorities. Yeah, that's true too. So that's for the Vedic people, for the Indo-Aryans, the function of these hymns, of course, is to pray to the gods and hopefully they'll help you, right? But for us, for historians and anthropologists, the Vedas serve a different purpose, right? For us, they're a window into the world of these people. We get to see what kind of things they want and what kind of things they value, right? And here we see two important things. They value cattle and they value sons, right? And so that might be very important for understanding how their culture actually works, right? What else do we learn in this part of the textbook about their family and social structure among the Indo-Aryans? And so again, you can see a pretty significant contrast here between the Indus River civilization that came before and these Indo-Aryans or Vedic people, right? We already seem to know more about the Vedic people than we did about the Indus River people because, again, they wrote things down. And as soon as people start writing something down, then we start to be able to learn about them. So we already know more about these Vedic people because of their writing, right? So Cindy says, so families were based around 3 generations of society, right? So you had grandparents, you had parents, and you had kids kind of living together and cooperating together. We see fathers as the head of the household, and that's something that's very common in most cultures today. If you went back to hunter-gatherer times, you would find, again, a lot more equality between men and women in society. But here you see there's a little bit of inequality, right? Fathers are the head of the household. And again, there seems to be a preference for boys, right? For sons. Cindy also says, fathers led the family as patriarchal heads. Patriarchal, I want to draw your attention to that word. Comes from 2 words that I think are Greek. Patris is father, and archon, which is ruler. So it's the father as ruler. And so patriarchy means that men are in charge. Men have the power, okay? So here we see men having the power in society. They're head of the family. The sons are in charge of caring for these herds of cattle. And again, we see men as dominant and women as subordinate. So we see a bit of an inequality between men and women in this society. And again, we already know that. We didn't know that with the Indus River people, but with the Vedic people, we know that. Casey says fathers were expected to lead the family. Good. Sons are expected to take care of the herds. But they also inherit their property and their family name. So we see things being passed down from one generation to another. Wealth, which is probably cattle. And we see their name being passed down from father to son as well. And so lots of cultures still work this way. And again, we see this happening very early with these Vedic people in India. But the text points out that even though men and women are somewhat unequal in this society, it's not quite as unequal as we see later on. And so women have some degree of power. They can choose who they can marry. They could remarry later on. And so we don't see a massive difference in terms of men and women's power in society. We see a lesser difference, okay? And Tika says, these Indo-Aryans have 3-generation extended family structures. Good. Men are the head of the families. Yes, very, very true. No problem, Michael. Good morning. That's Lim, I believe. Good morning. That's okay too. You can make it up to me by answering this question. The last one. So what does the Rig Veda tell us about the religion of the Indo-Aryans? So again, the Rig Veda is a collection of hymns that the priest would say or sing to the gods. And so obviously that's going to be able to tell us something about their religion. And Cindy says, first of all, we know it's polytheistic, right? These hymns are addressed to numerous different gods. And so, yeah, that tells us they have multiple gods. What else does Cindy say? We learn that Indra is kind of the most beloved, the most important, the one people pray to the most seems to be Indra. Whoops, hang on. Right, okay, and Tika says, for the Indo-Aryans, the universe consists of heaven, earth, and the underworld. I think you auto-corrected there, but that's okay. And the underworld. And everything was created by the gods. So that's kind of interesting too, because I think many world religions imagine the world to be this way, right? There's the kind of world we live in here on the earth that we're all familiar with. There's a world up there, and there's a world down there, right? Many of us have this kind of 3-leveled idea to how the world works, and these Vedic people have imagined it that way too, as having some sort of heaven, some sort of world up there, a world down here, and then a world downstairs, right? Which is often an underworld. Sometimes it's a hell. It depends on the religion you belong to, right? So yeah, kind of interesting that we see polytheism show up. So people look out at the world around them. They think about all of these different forces of nature that they can't explain, and they personify them, right? They imagine them as people, and then they pray to them and ask them for things, right? And so here again, we see that the world is divided up into all of these different natural forces, and each natural force has a different god, a person associated with it. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Where are we now? Okay, we're at 10:30. That's good. So what I want to do here is, India is a super, super interesting place. Very complex, very diverse. What I'd like us to do is to explore a little bit of that with part of a documentary that I want to show you. I'm not sure how much of this documentary I want to do with you yet. There's 6 parts to it, so it's about 6 hours long. I definitely don't want to do 6 hours with you. But I do want to do a little bit, because I think it's useful. It's good exposure. It talks about some of the things that we've talked about already, and helps give us a bit of a visual image. And I think that is very useful in this class. I think when you're looking at ancient cultures and ancient religions, the visual, getting a visual idea of what these places look like and how people might have behaved or interacted is super important. So I have a video for you to watch, and I also have some questions that I would like you to answer in connection with them. And so what I'll do, I'm actually doing it now. I'm gonna post it in Student Portal. And so in Student Portal, you'll see the link for the video. It's a YouTube video. You'll see the link for it, and then you'll see a time thing. So I only want you to watch until about 26 minutes in. Don't watch the whole thing. It's longer than that. I only want you to watch the first 26 minutes for now. And then I've got a few questions that I would like you to answer connected with that video. Super interesting, super cool stuff. But again, I'll ask you to watch the video and then we'll come back here and talk about it. So, is that okay? Is that okay? Do you have any questions for me, or are you good? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Emoji with a tear. What's okay? Thumbs up, says Karen. What about the rest of you? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Tika's good. I know. Cindy's okay. Michael's all good. Sam, oh my gosh, I can't even keep track. Carmen's good. Lim is good. Mashid is good. Carmen, Ella's good. Casey, okay. Everyone's all right. Okay. So let's see, everyone's good. Okay. So again, the video is about 26 minutes long. So I'll give you about a half an hour to watch it, and then we will take, Adalbert's good as well, half an hour to watch it, and then we'll take a 10-minute break. So 40 minutes from now will be at about 11:12, okay? So watch the video, and then at 11:12 we'll meet back here and we will talk about the answers to the questions. So don't forget to type them out, okay? So at 11:12, be back here, and we will, after having watched the video and answered the questions, and then we'll talk about what we saw, okay? So I'll see you after the video. Okay, people, and we're back. So, what did you think of that documentary? At least the piece you saw, anyway. Really cool, right? Yeah. Welcome back there, Jimmy. So, what did you think? Was it cool? Was it interesting? What are your reactions? Let's see. Okay, so Aliana says it was nice. It's okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. Um, that's fine. Kind of hard to understand. Okay, that's all right. That's no problem. We can work with that. Cool. We've got quite interesting, quite good. Okay. Yeah, this is a super interesting area of the world. Again, it's very, as the documentary points out, it is very diverse, but it also has very ancient roots, right? And it's a place in the world where there's a lot of genetic and linguistic and cultural and religious continuity, which again makes it different from a lot of the other civilizations. Mesopotamia that we talked about, Mesopotamia was, started with the Sumerians, but then was taken over by the Akkadians and taken over by the Babylonians, taken over by the Persians, later taken over by the Arabs. And so it's kind of been, the the original culture has kind of been mixed around with all sorts of other cultures. And Egypt's the same. Egypt sort of grew out of a distinct culture, but then it was conquered by the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and the Arabs again. And so all of these kind of original cultures have been mixed in with other people as they were conquered over and over again. And not that India wasn't, but there's a little more of a direct line, or at least that's what the documentary is trying to say. So what do they say right at the beginning of the documentary? They say, they talk about this kind of unbroken thread of human history. What are they talking about? What are your ideas about that? What are they talking about in terms of this unbroken thread of human history? Any ideas? What are your ideas there? There's this continuity of human history in this part of the world. Okay, so one of the things they say is that the prayers and the way modern and ancient are intertwined. Yeah, so we have this very long kind of religious history, this long religious history in the country, right, which is built, or in this region of the world, which is seems to extend back thousands of years and then kind of intertwines its way into the present, right? So that's important. What else? Other ideas in which India kind of preserves this common thread. Think, if you remember at the beginning, they were talking about the origins of humans, right? The origins of Homo sapiens, of our species, right? And they said, or we said in our first unit when we talked about prehistory and human evolution, we said that humans evolved in Africa, right? And around 60, 70,000 years ago, certain groups of them start leaving Africa and sort of colonizing the rest of the world, if you will. And one of the places that our human ancestors go to is India, right? And so when the narrator of the documentary, when he's on the beach at the beginning, he's walking along and saying, yeah, the first Indians came here. They were, people who had evolved in Africa and left Africa and eventually found themselves in India. And some, of course, continued to migrate on and colonize other parts of the world, but some of them stayed, right? And so there's a continuity of human history because some of the first people who left Africa found themselves in India and stayed, right? And so that's kind of what they're talking about in the next part when they, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. The narrator of the documentary, he attends that religious festival, right, where these Brahmins, these sort of religious leaders, are teaching these mantras, these chants to their little kind of apprentices, I guess. And then we see them at this ritual, sort of using these mantras and saying them for the people of the village. And so, what was so interesting about those? Why was the narrator so kind of astounded about what those things were? What was so special about them? What was so interesting about them? What was so interesting about those? Nothing. Nothing was interesting. It was all, come on, people. What was interesting about these? Maybe two things. It might be two things, or it might be one thing that you could say twice. Come on, people. Okay, so KC says some of them are in no known language. And so, yeah, some of them are in no known language, and the chants and the rules and patterns don't seem to have a meaning, but the patterns are predictable, right? And so some anthropologists are saying they come from bird songs. Yeah, so super interesting. So yeah, these mantras have been passed down for thousands of years maybe, and they're not written down because there's no actual way to write them, right? They're not in a language, right? So they extend back thousands of years into a language that nobody speaks anymore, which is amazing, right? And the narrator of the documentary also said that some of the structures and patterns that you see in these mantras are consistent, right? They're not just, it's not just people making things up. They're consistent, but again, they don't match any known language either. And so they almost are patterned on the songs of birds. And so they're imagining that these mantras and chants that people are still using have been passed down for so long that the original language that those mantras are in has disappeared, and we don't know what it is. And it might actually be so old that it actually mimics the sound of birds or the sound of animals, which is incredible, right? It's absolutely incredible. Because again, none of this stuff is written down, and so it's passed down orally from generation to generation. So this is what I wanted to ask you a second ago. I wanted to ask you, what are geneticists discovering about villagers in rural India? So we had those geneticists going into the little village, and they were talking about that particular gene. They were saying gene, I think it was M130. They were talking about this particular gene in human DNA. And what were they kind of discovering there? Maybe a couple things. Okay, so Lim says India's gene pool has remained largely constant. Yeah, so there have been a group of people who came to India thousands and thousands of years ago, and they've kind of mostly stayed there, right? Um, the people in that village, yeah, and it's connected to that very early first migration of humans, right, from Africa into India. Um, a lot of these people are related in one way or another because they have stayed and their ancestors have stayed and lived in the same area for so long, right? Which is unbelievable that there are people living in that part of the world that can almost trace their genetic history back 30 or 40 or 50,000 years, which is incredible, right? It's the continuity of people living in the same place and continuing to stay there is incredibly long, right? Unbelievable. Um, so after that, the narrator takes us to the Indus Valley, right? He takes us to those two cities that we talked about, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. He goes to Harappa, I think, and he was talking about the discovery of those cities and the discovery of this ancient civilization in the Indus Valley. And what does he talk about? Why does he say that European scholars were confused or surprised that an ancient civilization that old could appear in somewhere like India or Pakistan? What were they? Why were they so surprised? Why were they so surprised about that? Do you think? Okay, so Karen says, okay, short Europeans messing with history. Okay, yes, but I would like something a little more than that. Nobody suspected that India had a prehistory, so that's true. Um, Again, these ancient cities were abandoned around 1700 BC, so around 3,700 years ago, and people kind of forgot about them. Nobody really knew what they were, and they were just kind of lost to history, right? Until these archaeologists show up and start to do work on these cities in the 1920s. But give me more about that. Give me more to do with that thing there. So Lim says, oh yeah, okay, so nobody, yeah, okay, good, right? We said that. Um, Europeans thought people of India were not as civilized as them. And Lim says, Europeans saw India as a primitive, backward place. Yeah, they believed civilization was the product of the classical world. Yeah, so that sounds like a direct quote right there. Um, but it's true. That's exactly what the documentary said. And so um, history was always seen as very Eurocentric, okay, so European centered. Of course, in the 1700s and the 1800s and even the 1900s, Western civilization saw itself as the peak, right? As the pinnacle, as the sort of most advanced, most civilized society out there. And so, if you look back in terms of cultural history, Western civilization traces its roots back to ancient Rome and to ancient Greece. And in some cases, they've sort of claimed Mesopotamia and Egypt as their own as well. And so those civilizations are kind of connected to the very roots of European civilization. And so Europeans like to look to the roots of their own great civilization in the roots of those ancient civilizations like Greece and Rome and Egypt. But of course, European civilization doesn't have any direct connection to India, right? And so the European scholars of the time felt that, India is so primitive and backwards, how could they possibly have an ancient civilization? But of course, that's a very ethnocentric and kind of racist thing to say. But secondly, they actually do, right? There is a civilization that's just as old or older than Egypt and the Mesopotamian civilizations that appears in the Indus Valley, right? As I say, it's every bit of as impressive as those other civilizations that we've discussed. It's just we don't know as much about it, unfortunately. So, how many people might have lived in this Indus River Valley or in one of these cities? He's talking to, at one point, the narrator is talking to an Indian historian or archaeologist. And he says, how many people might have lived here at one time? So they estimate about 5 million people living in that empire. That's a huge number of people, that's a huge number of people. Do you have 5 million there? How many zeros do you have? Oh, you need one more zero, Karen. About 5 million people. And so that's huge, right? If you're in Vancouver here and you're living in the Lower Mainland, we have about 2.5 million people living in this area. So double that, and you have a huge number of people living in one place for the ancient world anyway. I know nowadays there's there's 7.5 billion of us. There's a lot of us. 5 million doesn't seem like a lot, but for that time in history, for 4 or 5,000 years ago, for 5 million people to be living in one area and sort of interacting and trading and cooperating, that's huge. That's a massive civilization for this point, for this time in history. Last question I asked you was this, is what may have led to, that's definitely true. One of the first societies of human civilization, definitely. So what may have led to the end of the Indus River Valley civilization? So the textbook we read, the textbook starts talking about these Vedic people coming in, right? So there were these Indus River Valley people living in the area for about 1,000 years, and then around 1700 BCE, these other people come in, these Vedic or these Indo-Aryan people come in, and they seem to be herding cattle. But what does the documentary say about what happened to these civilizations and why people stopped living and farming in these Indus River Valley civilizations? So Casey says the trading system collapsed, okay. And environment and climate change were the reason. The drying of the river, good. So that climate scientist, I'm not sure if he's a climate scientist or a geologist. He's probably a geologist, actually, but he points the finger at a change in, there's a migration for sure. Lion, I forget who you are. Is that you, Sarvish? I can't remember. I'm sorry. I haven't seen that pop up in a while. So the documentary points the finger at the monsoon, right? These very sort of large rains that come at a certain point of the year, and oh, that is Sarvish. Okay, thought so. Hey, um, so these rains that sort of come and deposit huge amounts of water on the landscape, they start to come in the monsoon starts to shrink, right? So not as much rain comes. And so what happens? Well, the rivers don't fill up as much. Canals don't fill up as much. You can't water as many of your crops anymore. You don't raise enough crops. There's not enough food, right? So this change in the monsoon, this change in how much rain comes, means that people can't really live in such big numbers in the Indus River Valley anymore. They have to move on. And so the scientist in the documentary says that's what people do. They kind of move to the south and to the, I think they move to the east actually. The south and to the east into kind of the Ganges River area. And so maybe that's what allows those, Indo-Aryan people to come in, right? Maybe things were, the monsoon was decreasing, things were becoming drier. People in the Indus River Valley started to leave because they couldn't raise their crops. And then these Indo-Aryan people start moving in with their herds of cattle and they start grazing. So this kind of larger change in climate, this larger change in rainfall in the monsoon, actually results in people kind of shifting and moving around within India. And it's possible that those Indo-Aryan people were moving from their own homeland because of climate change there as well. So climate change can kind of shift people around in a, climate change can shift people around within an environment. And especially if you're trying to grow your crops next to a river and then the river stops flooding or it doesn't provide enough water, you have to move, right? You can't stay in the same place. And so the documentary starts to explain why that is. Okay, so here's where we are. What about flood? Yeah, the flooding might have been possible too. And so it depends on who you talk to, I think. I guess the long story short here, Adelbert, is that people don't know for sure why this civilization collapsed. Certainly having that many people living in one place requires the river to be consistent and to water the crops appropriately. If you don't have enough water, then you can't water your crops and people are going to start to starve, right? If you have uncontrollable flooding, which also could have been the case, then it starts to destroy people's farms and then they can't stay there either, right? If you have other hostile people coming in from another territory, then people may run away, right? They may flee to another place where it's safer. On the other hand, if people are leaving already, it might make space for those other people to come in and sort of expand their territory. And so there's a lot of things, and of course, as a result of that, as a result of all those things happening, trade networks start to collapse, right? People start to leave, they're not trading with other areas, people have no one to sell to anymore. And so the whole thing kind of comes apart. But I think the short story here is that nobody's entirely sure what happened, and it was probably a very complex interrelationship between all of these things. And so there were changes in climate. The river might have been unpredictable, maybe too low sometimes, maybe flooding at other times. Maybe there were these other people coming in from a foreign land. Maybe they pushed the people out, or maybe the people were already leaving. It's not entirely clear. And again, we'll come back to the issue of writing. We can't read anything people wrote. And so we don't know what happened. People can't tell us what happened in their own words. And so that's what's difficult about studying civilizations with no writing, is that sometimes you really just don't know for sure what was happening because nobody can tell us, right? We can't read. Okay, so tomorrow what we'll do is we'll pick up the story of these Indo-Aryans, or these Vedic peoples. We'll talk a little bit about their religion and a little bit about their language and language itself. Other than that, I think that's all I have for you today. So, do you have any questions? Are there things you want to raise, um, or should we break? Are we good? Do you have any questions? Give me a thumbs up if you're good, or if you have a question, type in a question. Okay, so Sam looks good. I know those emojis don't show up, but still good. KC's good. Michael's good. Karen's good. Ying is good. Dika's good. Lim is good. Carmen's good. Sarvish is good. Mashid is good. Liana is good. Okay. So that's where we will. Adalbert is good. That's where we'll leave it for today. Don't forget to work on your micropapers because they're due on Friday. But other than that, I think I'll leave it there. And tomorrow we'll pick up the story of India with these Vedic people, a bit about their religion, a bit about their language, and a bit about language as well. Jimmy's good as well. Ella's good. Okay. So I think Jenna's good. Jenna's good too. Okay. So thank you for being here today, people. Min is good. Thank you for participating. Maybe some of you who aren't participating so much in the live chat, I'd like it if you would. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier if there's more stuff to talk about. Even if you're wrong, it's okay, because part of answering these questions is learning and discovering things. Okay, so don't be afraid to be wrong. Just throw your answer up there, and we'll deal with it. Okay. Okay. That said, though, I will leave it there today. Thanks for being here. Hope you have a nice afternoon, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Okay, so bye.